All right, aloha mai kako. Welcome everyone. Selamat sore, selamat pagi for those that might be joining online in Indonesia or elsewhere. It's great to welcome you here for an EWC Insights series. This is our last EWC Insights. We'll be transitioning into a different format in the coming month. And we're really fortunate today to have Cynthia Fowler, who is joining us to give a presentation about her recent work that she just completed through her Fulbright in Indonesia, in Sumba. So quick introduction, Cynthia Fowler is chair of the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She is co-editor of 2 monograph series, Global Change, Global Health, and Contributions in Ethnobiology. And we're really fortunate to have you here today. So I'm gonna very quickly turn it right over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you to all of you who are here today, online and in person, on this beautiful Prince Kuhio Day. I appreciate you coming out on a holiday. And I thank you, Micah, so much for introducing me. And Jeff Fox, thank you so much for posing the idea of coming to talk today. And thanks to the whole East West Center team for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about my research with you today. I also want to acknowledge my adopted family and friends and collaborators on Sumba Island, especially in the region of Kodi in the western part of the island, who have allowed me to take up space in their homelands and explore with them ways that I could fit in with their community. To begin with part 1, Tana Humba. Sumba, with the alternative pronunciation Humba, sometimes can be translated to mean water. It's the name of an island in the province of Nusa Tenggara Timur, where ethnonyms mark the symbolic weight of water. Y, sometimes pronounced Wayo or Way, meaning freshwater, is iconic for Sumbanese people who dwell in a hydrologically heterogenous space created by tectonic forces where the monsoonal climate generates strong seasonal variability in water supplies. Integrated with the hydrogeological context, the social context has given rise to bountiful ethnolinguistic diversity for the island's blended Austronesian-Papuan communities who syncretize their ancestral Marapu religion with Christianity and merge their exchange-based subsistence economy with capitalism. Islanders identify most closely with their specific ethnolinguistic group, while also recognizing an island-wide coalition of societies and acknowledging their allegiance to Indonesia. Next slide, please. These are a list of some of the research questions that I've been working on for the past few years while collecting information through research studies, literature studies, and also field work. And then over the past few months, working on analyzing the information from those 2 sources. And some of in the top set of questions, these are questions that you'll hear today that I pose, that none of which I fully answer. And then the second 2 questions are the same. I sort of hint at these 2 questions, but I certainly don't fully answer them. I'm still, this is definitely a research program that's still under development and is very young and fresh. And the second 2 questions I've put here, even though I only just sort of hint at them in today's talk, because I feel like they're really relevant and interesting for you all here at the East West Center. One of the questions is, how do the ways that Codanese interact with water in the dry season compare with the wet season? I think this is really interesting relative to Sumba, because the seasonal variability in rainfall is so strong on Sumba. And then the second question, how do Codanese interactions with water in a year with a strong La Nina and a negative Indian Ocean dipole, which was 2022, Compare with interactions in a year with a strong El Nino and a positive Indian Ocean dipole, which is 1997. Okay, so studying changing relationships with people in freshwater on Sumba requires a framework that encompasses sequential scales from the ancient to the present, from the ethnic group to the nation state, and accounts for interlocking transformations of the geological and the hydrological, the linguistic and the cultural. Seeing freshwater on Humba as modified by both environmental vicissitudes and human activities means approaching it as a coupled social ecological system. Next slide, please. In Tana Humba, or water country, it depends on who you cite, but the number of languages spoken are 4 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 11. And I promise I just saw the number 29 in another source, but I hesitated to put it on here. You can see on this map, there's 16 languages mapped. So freshwater reservoirs on this island bear ethnohistorical significance, which is communicated through many means, including a practice of naming places that follows a 2-word formula where the word for water, Y, is attached to a culturally relevant term. And next slide, please. An example is Waiholo, the name of a spring that combines the word Y for water with the term holo, meaning hauling water on the shoulder inside a bamboo pole. Historically, Waiholo Spring has served as a source of water for residents in many hamlets, and the spring's name was given to Desa Waiholo Village, when the collection of hamlets coalesced into an administrative unit in the colonial style. By the 1990s, Cody women were using plastic containers instead of bamboo, and they hauled waters using the junjung method of carrying it on top of their heads. But Waiholo Village, an upland village in the Kecamatan or district of North Cody, has been at the heart of my ethnographic work since 1997. From the beginning, Codanese say, there are people oriented themselves around freshwater. The organization of settlement patterns is obvious to outside observers as well, like Monk and their co-authors who write, quote, rivers, lakes, swamps, and groundwater determine settlement patterns and agricultural systems on Sumba. Despite this practicality, many residents of Tana Humba in the late 20th and early 21st century have faced serious challenges in getting consistent access to enough good quality water to meet their needs. So what are the challenges that Codanese have encountered during the previous 25 years, and how have they dealt with them? And next slide, please. To answer this question, I rely upon ethnographic details about islanders' interactions with water amidst social and ecological fluctuations. I describe the coupled social ecological conditions in Waiholo and adjacent villages within the Mataloko watershed in the North Cody district and the neighboring Cody district of the Southwest Sumba Regency to explain how water and culture change relative to one another. Understanding how people's relationships with water have changed feels urgent in light of pressures from climate change and concerns about political ecological developments, especially related to natural resources and human rights. Next slide, please. Regarding human rights, through law number 17, 2019, Indonesia recognizes that water is a basic human need. The same law promotes sanitation as a means of preserving, protecting, and conserving surface water. Law number 122, 2015 directs the state to fulfill citizens' right to water. As of 2021, however, Indonesia had no plans or policies to improve equity and access to drinking water, sanitation, or hygiene for indigenous populations, ethnic and religious minorities, women and girls, the elderly, people living in hard to reach places, or people disproportionately impacted by climate change, though they do have plans and policies for impoverished persons. The absence of plans and policies for these vulnerable groups means Indonesia is not on the path to achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is, quote, to ensure access to water and sanitation for all by 2030. Enormous efforts are being directed to achieving SDG 6 by parties from around the world, and I'm incredibly humbled to cast my modest contributions of information from Cody into this massive stream of work. Next slide, please. Where I best can contribute, I believe, is with the problem in realizing access to all noticed by Lila Mehta, where, quote, generalized globalized arguments that underpin policy debates tend to remain disconnected from everyday experiences of local people. The best hope I have in contributing to narrowing Meta's gap between policies and lived experiences are ethnographic. My colleagues in Cody know this about me, which is why several of them asked me to study the problem of water, and why one of my many names in Cody is Honabuku, which is a local name, but also they tell me can be translated literally as looking for a book. So sometimes they just say buku, and which means book. So they know I'm a researcher. They know that they can ask me to study something. And so they've asked me to study the problem of water. It's a crucial problem on Sumba because, as one elder and a longtime collaborator put it, water is the biggest limitation we face. So in response to multiple similar remarks and requests for research, I selected people's interactions with freshwater as the main topic for field work that I did in 2022. Why is accessing water so stressful for Codanese? So my goal in 2022 was to document the current challenges Codanese face with obtaining sufficient quality and quantity of water, and to compare these with the situation in 1997 when I was a graduate student here at UH and I first began learning about political ecology in their homelands. Interesting patterns emerge when differences in individuals' interactions with water are matched with differences in atmospheric oceanic circulations. Next slide, please. Especially the Southern Oscillation and the Indian Ocean Dipole between 1997 and 2022. And if you'll just notice what's in red and purple font for INSO, like I said before, in 1997, 98 was a very strong El Nino, and it was paired with a positive Indian Ocean Dipole, which means that conditions fostered by El Nino were even stronger. More drought, which means more drought, crop failure, and more fires, and more hunger, and so forth in Eastern Indonesia. And then in 2022, now sort of faded away into 2023, was this very strong La Nina, and that was paired with a negative Indian Ocean Dipole, which again also makes the conditions that La Nina favors even stronger, so even more rain. Okay, so the links between changes in water variabilities and people's water-related activities are brought out by comparing details also between precipitation and water collecting practices in 1997 with details about these from 2022. So next slide, please. So consider water access at the province, regency, and district levels based on statistics collected by the government, and then also at the village and the hamlet levels based on my own ethnographic data. Here, it's pretty simple data from Waiholo village. So at the village level, from information that I collected, the population has declined slightly. That's the orange bar, only slightly in the past 25 years. And then basically, the places where Waiholo villagers collect water has stayed the same. That is, that they've been collecting water from unimproved or natural sources of like springs, rivers, creeks, lakes. And then next slide, please. Just for comparative purposes, this shows the neighboring village. If you can see Waiholo on the map in the sort of northeast compared to Wailabubor in the sort of southwest. Just two neighboring villages very close to one another. The water collection activities are strikingly different for Wailabubor, where nearly 100% of Waiholo residents are collecting water from natural sources. 90% of Wailabubor residents are collecting from improved sources. Those are piped utilities constructed by excuse me, sorry, by got to get closer to the mic, by Pro-Ayer, a development project, the name of a development project, coalition, organization, bilateral undergoing. So, okay, so the figures showing the nearly total reliance among Waiholo villagers on springs, streams, and lakes for freshwater require some qualification. So observations that I made during fieldwork in Waiholo and North Cody show that many villagers obtain water from additional types of sources. So this information showing 100% of Waiholo villagers collecting from unimproved natural sources in 2022 was based on a written survey. Based on other observations that I made, there are other sources where people collect from. So next slide, please. So this lists 5 types of sources that I would say that Waiholo villagers are looking towards to collect their water. There are the natural reservoirs. There's a combination of natural reservoirs and piped networks. And there's some people collecting from wells associated with individual households or multi-household collectives. Some people collecting from cisterns in their own household that are filled either by rainwater and or tanker trucks. And then there are also neighbors. So some people are borrowing, being given or buying water from neighbors who have cisterns in their yards. And then next slide, please. And then you see here at the Regency level, statistics collected by the Regency government for Southwest Sumba in 2020, showing that the variety of sources where residents in the Regency are getting their water. Okay, so the qualitative data on the types of water sources are subject to additional conditionals. They mostly generalize reality across the annual cycle. You do see rainfall on this in the yellow in this chart. However, mostly the statistics are not differentiating between what happens during the wet season and what people do during the dry season. So next slide, please, which is very significant. You can see in this slide showing rainfall levels from 2015 to 2022 at the Regency level. And if you'll just notice the difference in seasonality going from January until December, and also from year to year, how much variability there is. So at a high point in January, there may be 541 millimeters of rain, and at a low point in August, there may be 0. Next slide, please. And these are just 2 more figures showing you a little bit about variability and precipitation. On the left, one showing rainfall averaged over the years from 1979 to 2010. And you'll notice Sumba is the orange bar. This is a comparative slide from Dubois and co-authors, not one that I created. And you'll see for Sumba in orange, again, there's a striking difference between the wet season months, roughly December through April, but that varies depending on the year, especially like if it's El Nino or La Nina and so forth. And then the dry season, roughly from June till October, but again, that varies as well. And the map on the right is showing you variability and precipitation spatially. So you'll see some parts of the western end of the island of Sumba, so Western Sumba, including Southwest Sumba Regency. The northern parts of the Regency get more rainfall, and the southern parts less. So when rainfall is available, many households activate their rainwater capture systems, which mostly involve using a variety of containers to capture water draining from the eaves of their alon grass or their metal roofs. Next slide, please. Gutters made from bamboo or similar materials channel water from roofs to containers at some houses. So in 1997, precipitation was sparse. So not only was the amount of rainwater available for capture low, or only available for a shorter period of time in a shortened rainy season, but water levels were also lower in springs and streams and lakes. In 2022, precipitation was abundant, if not overabundant, and sedimentation was heavy. One more, for now anyway, conditional about access to water is to be wary of generalizations. Within the global and national context, Cody as a whole is marginalized. Communities are internally stratified as well, even at the local level of the village and the hamlet. So intercultural differences between Cody women and children related to their intersectional identities coincide with variations in their access to natural and developed water sources. Unequal access to water occurs within Cody society, whereby some subgroups, such as women of lower status living far from roadsides in Waiholo, have more limited access to clean water and have to travel farther to access it compared with women of lower status living on the roadside in Wailabubor. Beyond the Cody region at the island scale, Sumbanese society is internally stratified along dimensions of not only gender, but also cross-cutting identities of lineage, clan and subclan, class, religion, marriage, age, language and literacy, and education. Now for part 2. Next slide, please. Changes in freshwater ecosystems and social changes are differentially experienced along multiple dimensions of identity and at manifold scales, from the watershed to the planet, from the individual to the global. Whilst freshwater ecosystems transform due to hydrological, ecological, and climatological processes, they are also undergoing changes due to social dynamics and cultural processes occurring within human communities. As a means for illustrating interlocking hydrological and socio-cultural changes, I'd like to share 3 stories from within the Mataloko watershed, one in the micro-watershed of Waiholo, one in the Kori River micro-watershed, and one from Wailiang and Waikindu micro-watersheds. So let's start with the first story, Reservoirs of Resilience, where birth, death, and relocation intersect with changes in the type of reservoir and the tools and vehicles used to manage water. Next slide, please. Mahamuda walked through the gate carrying a 3-liter jerry can full of water in each hand. She set her load down between the concrete house, still unfinished after 20 years under construction, and the thatch house where her family resides. Mahamuda exchanges plans with her 23-year-old daughter, Ria, and exits the gate again. Within 15 to 20 minutes, she returns with 2 more jerry cans full of water, this time on the back of a moped driven by her 16-year-old son, Yuda. She climbs off the moped with her jerry cans and sets them down next to the other 2 before Yuda rides off again to go visit his friends. Yuda is Mahamuda's 3rd child and her oldest living son. Her first son, Wati, was born in 1996 and died in 1997, the year I met her. Wati's funeral, held after he died at 10 months old from brain malaria, was the first one I attended that year, which was a year of an extreme El Nino-induced drought and a great famine. Mahamuda and her husband, Pirokedo, lived in Waiholo village with his parents, grandmother Kali Goba and grandfather Paratene. That's grandmother there in the photo. Their house was next to the elementary school where the grandfather taught, and 4/10 of a kilometer from the spring that gave its name to the village, Waiholo. Next slide, please. In 2001, after the grandfather died, Mahamuda and her husband, Pirokedo, and their 1-year-old daughter, Ria, their second baby, and the grandmother moved 5.5 kilometers westward to a roadside lot on the edge of Kori village. Next slide, please. In this place, where they constructed a home out of pandana siding and alang roofing, Mahamuda had another daughter and 2 more sons. The Kori River, which came downhill from the hills of Noha village, ran year-round about 2/10 of a kilometer away, across the street and through a few rice corn gardens. The river was closer to her new home than the Waiholo spring was to her old house, about half the distance. So accessing water and hauling it home became slightly easier for Mahamuda. 22 years later, her work is slightly easier again since her neighbor's concrete cistern where she collects water, unless she can capture enough rainfall to supply her needs, is half the distance again, closer, and she can choose between motorized and non-motorized modes of hauling her load back to the house. Fortunately, Mahamuda has the options of getting water from a neighbor's cistern or from the community tap in the backyard of a neighbor's house. The pipe connected to the community tap is fed by the Mataloko River, which is upstream to the east and on the opposite side of Waiholo from Kori. You can see sort of them relative to one another in the map on this slide. Even though the pipe from that same system is laid underground and runs right through the front yard of Mahamuda's house, she is not able to access it. Next slide, please. In between the switch from sourcing water from the neighbor's cistern or the community tap and sourcing water from the river, Mahamuda and other members of the communities near the river were in heightened crises, even more severe crises than the routine ones that they face, because the Kori River stopped flowing in 2011 or 2012. Many households had relied upon the river to meet their water needs when rainwater was unavailable. The Kori River used to flow year-round with clear water fed by springs and tributaries. For roughly a decade now, the water in the riverbed is no longer running. The riverbed is empty during the dry season, and when the monsoon rains are falling, The water in the river is full of muddy runoff that's not potable or even clean enough for washing clothes. You can see the contrast in the slide here. I'd also like to point out in the map on the slide on the right, where the arrow is pointing to the wind gap at the upstream terminus of the Kori River. If you can see those on the map on the right, what this map is showing you, and this map was created by Christine Athamayo and her co-authors, is one possible reason why the Kori River may have stopped flowing, and the wind gap is evidence that a river or a stream has changed its drainage. It has moved or it has stopped flowing. This presence of a wind gap at the top end of the Kori River, in other words, is evidence that the Kori River used to flow there, and well, it no longer does. So opinions about the cause of the river drying up vary from the personalistic to the naturalistic. Mahamuda, whose explanation falls within the former category, tells the story of a man who lives upstream in Noha village, and he was bitter about a land conflict, so he dammed the river with boulders and concrete as an act of aggression against his enemies. Mahamuda tells a story about the occasion when her husband, Piru Kato, participated in an upriver expedition to locate the blockage, but his crew failed to find anything. The expedition was shortly after the water stopped flowing. This was about 10 years before 40-something-year-old Piru Kato died, which was in June 2022. A naturalistic explanation for the river drying up is tectonics. An earthquake shifted the ground and caused a rearrangement of the hydrological system. This explanation was voiced by a local man who's a technician employed by Pro Ayer. He's employed to install and maintain their pipes and their pumps and other aspects of the water utility system. And his naturalistic explanation sounds similar to Athamayo and her co-authors, as illustrated in the slide. So back to the opening scene. While Mahamuda and Yuda were hauling water home from their neighbor's cistern, the grandmother was cooking for her widowed daughter-in-law and her grandchildren, still grieving from the loss of their father. And as she cooked, grandmother moved from the outdoor kitchen to the unloading site, back and forth to take water from the jerry cans as needed for the food she was preparing. So grandmother cooks all the nutritious meals centered around rice and taro and cassava, bananas, corn, coconuts, jackfruit, tomatoes, squashes, fish, and more locally grown and caught foods, usually garnished with chilies and salt. That many, if not most of her dishes are cooked in fresh water, some with homemade coconut oil. When she has no rainwater to capture for her domestic water supply, her children and grandchildren bring the water home. And grandmother's role in managing the flow of water and the interactions of the members of her household with fresh water are substantial. They're meaningful. They're very significant parts of the story about the water related to, as Deepa Joshi puts it, quote, material, physical, as well as emotional experiences of vulnerability that women face, and how these change over a family's history. So next quote, please. And next for story number, next slide, sorry. And I'll come up with a quote soon. And so next for story number 2, the tyranny of water and food insecurity. It illustrates Kodi people's worldviews and their critiques of development and justice. So imagine the scene where the ethnographic interview had transitioned into a conversation ripe for bold meta-commentary. The interlocutors, members of a farming family located in Kikumbembe hamlet in the floodplain of the bone-dry bed of the Kori River, had talked their way from explaining the current situation through to the backstory about the river drying up and the harvest declining. The audio recording was off, the field notebook was closed, the pen was put away, and then came forth the biting commentary. And here's the quote from Detta Dari. Once in the past, foreigners colonized us. Still now, water and food tyrannize us. And Detta Dari made this comparison between the feeling of being colonized by an external political economy with the feeling of being tyrannized by deficient basic resources. To be tyrannized by water and food is similar to being colonized by farmers. Detadari, who provided this insight, is the son of the family's widowed matriarch, grandmother Kakadaha. He's the husband of 2 wives and the father of 8 boys and girls. Detadari's analogy establishes a frame for connecting enduring, large-scale, historically deep political processes with acute local livelihoods. Turning the gaze back to globalized systems and their symbols, like Detadari did, Codanese explicitly remark upon the inequalities and inequities they witness and frequently offer solutions. In the Codanese applied counter gaze, redistribution of wealth and access to resources are primary means for righting systemic marginalization. I feel this deeply because whenever I have set out with the intention of doing research in their homelands, Codanese shape their conversations around evaluations of my possessions, tools of the trade, everything, pens, notebooks, bags, clothes, food, bicycle, laptop, and also forms of conversation that I offer in exchange for all of the things that my interlocutors share with me, like betel, areca, cigarettes, cash, microgrants, pens, notebooks, bags, clothes, and other consumer goods. They remark upon these items of wealth and they ask for them, and then they ask for more, and then they ask for more. And with even greater frequency in 2022 compared to 1997, they ask for cash. So unpacking Detadari's imperialism is like desertification analogy, as I have done with this short story about a consequential shift in stream flow, reveals a bit about the coevolution of political ecologies and water poverty. Pulling apart the haunting analogy also sheds light upon the interlayering of aspirations of sovereignty with visions of affluence, or at least sufficiency. Detadari's suggestion of tyranny refers to his experience with alterations in a river's flow that he connects to increased vulnerability to food and water scarcity that he politicizes as being associated with development projects run by outside agencies. In the case of Pro-Air, these are Indonesian and German governments and banks. Next slide, please. And onto the third story, access, privilege, and capital, which turns to the military and paramilitary as colluding with extrinsic agencies who direct hydrological interventions. Dada Lolo has many privileges relative to other women in her village because her husband, Dara Tapa, is the Kepala Desa, the head of Noha village. And yet, she has no running water. The source for some of Dada Lolo's water is a concrete above-ground cistern located outside of her house. And during the rainy season, she captures water in the cistern, or during the dry season, she purchases water from a tanker truck that delivers to her house, or from some alternative source, such as her neighbor's cistern or a natural reservoir. Many other women in Noha village don't have concrete cisterns or faucets near their home, and thus they continue to rely on rainwater and natural reservoirs to source their needs. Next slide, please. When Dada Lolo and all women in her generation were younger, and also women in all prior generations for their entire lives, they depended on natural sources for water, on rain, streams, lakes, springs, micro reservoirs. For those women in Noha who are privy to the benefits of development, their homes are located within proximity to 2 projects that about 2 or 3 years ago built networks of hoses, pipes, faucets, pumps, solar panels, and holding tanks. Water flows through these 2 networks to some parts of Noha some of the time, but it doesn't flow all of the time or all the way to the inside kitchens, bathrooms, or other rooms inside homes. Instead, when the water is running clear, the water flowing out of the pipes is clean enough to harvest, although it may contain some harmful elements. For example, limestone sediment eroded from the ancient coral reefs that form the island. But the water can be boiled to kill off germs, and it can be filtered to separate the limestone. However, during the rainy season, the water's too full of mud to filter, so it's not usable. Regardless of the season or precipitation volume, the pumps don't always flow because they run on solar power. And if the sun's not shining, the water's not running, or they malfunction from some other causes. Next slide, please. Each of the 2 networks of pipes in Noha is sourced from the point of a river's resurgence. One source is Wei Liang, which translates as wild water. It's a resurgence point of the Mata Loco River after it flows for some distance underground. And the section of the river that flows out of Wai Liang and through Noha is named Lat Papatdu, or Bitter Oreka in Cody. At Wai Liang, the water empties out of a cave, and a few meters downriver from there, a dam has been constructed and pipes installed to harvest a portion of the river's flow into one network, servicing households downstream in 4 villages, including Waila Bubor, which was mentioned earlier, where 90% of the residents rely on that piped water system for water now in 2022. The second source for developments in Noha is a spring named Waikindu, which translates as where the water rises, which is another resurgent site where the flow is abundant enough to supply a creek that flows downhill into a river that drains into the Indian Ocean about 20 kilometers from the source. An above ground pliable pipe draws water out of the spring at Waikindu into 2 storage tanks located less than 1 kilometer uphill from the spring. Both storage tanks are bright blue, and the tank farthest uphill has the message Negara hadir untuk rakyat, Kodim 1620 SPD. In other words, the state is here for the people. Military District Command 1629, Southwest Sumba. It's painted on the side in a brownish gold hue. The mural tags the district level unit 1629 of the Indonesian National Armed Forces that's stationed in the Regency of Sumba, Southwest Sumba, SPD, who funded the project by paying for the materials and the labor of the crew of builders. The commander of the unit is a man named Tohir Yuswan Putra, and he claimed he claimed that the motivations for the military were to provide the farmers in Noha, and this is a quote from him from a newspaper report, quote, agricultural needs such as horticultural crops to reduce household expenses. That was the reason for the project. To use the words of Shailendra, a journalist who writes about water issues in Sumatra, one of the, quote, key executors of the military's construction project and its ongoing maintenance at Waikindu, that's in Sumba, is Gaudentius Bria. He's the resident Babinsa, which is a territorial defense manager representing the Indonesian national military. Babinsas are village level intelligence officers who are responsible for identifying and monitoring radicals and extremists in hopes of preventing terrorism. In 2017, a Babinsa in the Aceh region of Sumatra said that he had been assigned to, this is also from Shailendra's newspaper report, quote, gather intelligence on local community dynamics, conduct surveillance of local geography and infrastructure, and profile important local figures. So as the head of Noha village and Dara Tapa's vision of providing running water for all of Noha's residents endures, they nevertheless have not been realized. His vision. Many Noha villagers feel that they've been abandoned by developers and that they have no alternative funding sources to extend the water utilities. So let's see. So the members of Dadalolo's bustling household, this is the wife of the Kapala Desa of Noha, they consume a fair amount of water. They have 6 children, plus family members who come and go, plus their house is a political center as the house of the village head. So there's a lot of water being consumed. Among Dadalolo's 5 sons and 1 daughter, the 2 youngest sons and the daughter are in school. The oldest son's a policeman. The second son is married with 1 child, and the third son's in prison. And so having a prisoner and a policeman in the family is paradoxical. And in that maybe unpacking it could reveal some truths about the system within which it exists. So I'm gonna just tell you this story really quickly. So the son who's in prison moved to a town in the capital of Southwest Sumba Regency, and 6 of his cousins also moved there, members of his sub-clan, and they were tight. They were each other's closest confidants. They were hanging out at the beach one evening in June of 2022, and one of the cousins, Martin, was playing the guitar, and another group of guys came up along. They came up to the beach, and one of them asked Martin if they could play his guitar, and he said sure, and he loaned him the guitar, and the interloper played the guitar for a while, and then Martin asked for it back, and the guy said no, and things heated up, and it turned into a brawl between the 7 cousins and these the guy who borrowed the guitar and his posse, who were, turns out, plainclothes members of BRI Mob, the paramilitary, the Mobile Brigade Corps, which is a branch of the Indonesian police. So Gera, the Kepala Desa of Noha's son, and his 6 cousins were accused of insurrection and imprisoned and found guilty. And to free them would cost 20 million rupiah, which is way out of the reach of even 7 combined households in Kodi. And so as of January 2023, these cousins were still in prison. And I'm just going to take about 5 more minutes and wrap this up. So people suspected of opposition to the Indonesian government are sometimes baited by the police, the military, and the paramilitary. This is not an unusual story. Some arrests are arbitrary. Due process for people charged with crimes is not guaranteed in Indonesia. Freedom House gives Indonesia a 1 out of 4 on the issue of due process, a number that combined with other measures of freedom adds up to an overall rating by Freedom House of partly free as a nation. So the Kodi brothers paradox generates meaningful insights about police violence in the Regency's coastal capital, as well as about water insecurity in the rural villages in the hills. And wrapping up the whole narrative, I'm going to say that similar to elsewhere in the world, where people, and to quote Slatin and Brayley, and also have a list of references, if anyone would like to see the references cited here, please ask me, I'll be happy to provide those for you. So Slatin and Brayley say, quote, occupying marginalized social positions within a nexus of power relations. In Kodi community, community members continuously find themselves navigating inequitable situations pre and post intervention and throughout the project cycle as developers show up in a community, build their projects, and leave. So how do the Kodanese respond? And can you just forward to, let's see, yes, the last slide. So we really have to listen carefully to hear Kodanese responses to these inequities. So among Indonesians in other communities, activism is one response to inequitable access and the degradation of the quality and quantity of natural water supplies, as testified to by cases, for example, one written about by Kartika Hindrastiti and Siti Kusujiarti from Central Sumba Regency on Sumba Island, and another one written by also Hindrastiti from Saluma Regency on Sumatra Island. In Kodi, one form advocacy takes or asks for material goods and monetary assistance. To get a sense of what this sounds like, one Kodi woman shares out loud her desire for, quote, a faucet inside every home. So advocacy may take the form of grievances also, grievances against the inequities and access to improved facilities that have emerged from or been exacerbated by development projects. As another Kodi woman says, kami yang rugi, which I might translate here as we're suffering damages, or we're suffering damages, or because of the context of when she said kami yang rugi, I might translate as not only is this a failed promise, but we also lost our clean water already. And she said this when standing next to a water kiosk like this one that's broken down and that was built by Pro Ayer. That was partly financed by her community where cash is scarce, and that's an understatement. After she pointed to the faded mural on the painted on the facade, which you can probably barely make out here, but then there's translation. Mari kita pelihara sarana air bersih untuk kita sampai anak cucu. Or let's maintain clean water facilities for us and our children and grandchildren's future. And I'll stop there. And can you just go to the next slide and for questions and answers? all I have for you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think we can take some questions. Does anybody have questions from the audience? And I'll monitor the online Q&A.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really important. Thank you. I was really drawn to the title of the talk. So I wondered if you could talk maybe a bit more. Oh, sorry. If you could talk just a bit more about how you're using rhythm to approach Cody life and water, and especially. Okay, thank you. Not sure what your interests are, but this is really about when I think of the rhythms in relation to Codanese relationships with freshwater. This is a concept that came to mind, and it has a lot to do with literal rhythms, literally the shaking of the earth by the frequent earthquakes that occur in this region, which is right on the border of the Ring of Fire. This is not a volcanic island. It's an uplifted coral reef island. There are volcanic rocks underlying the coral reef, but they're from way back in the Cretaceous era. So there are no, in other words, but there are a lot of earthquakes. So it also has to do with rhythms related to the literal movement of the island because of the oceanic subduction zone that sits just to the southwest of the island, and the continental collision zone that sits just to the northeast of the island and is literally still moving the island up. And then also, meanwhile, you have precipitation caused by rain, which is also rhythmical with the seasons. And so a lot of the concept of rhythm really came out of the thinking of what's going on ecologically here. What are Cody people, what do they have to work with when they're constructing their relationships with freshwater? Like what is this reality that they are working with? But there probably is a more extensive conversation there. Okay.
I can use
If
the
you have
mic
a
right
question,
here.
you can turn on your mic.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Ben. I'm a PhD student in the history department. You have a lot of questions. You're talking about water in a very practical sense, water as a source of sustenance for the peoples living there, focusing on fresh water. When I think of Sumba, I think a lot about sort of rituals and festivals such as Pasola that are meant to sort of give thanks to more of a spiritual power, you know, in that case, trying to get fertility from the land. And correct me if I'm wrong, if the people of Cody don't participate in that. But in terms of water, is there any spiritual connection that the peoples have to water that are maybe also informing their decisions, particularly fresh water, informing their decisions and how they treat water in this particular context?
Okay, great, thank you. Cody has a Pasola, and it just happened very recently. And yeah, it's very central part of their culture as well. So yeah, they yeah, the religious and spiritual and ritual life is super interesting in Cody, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to cover that much today, but it does shape their religion, and their spirituality does shape their relationship with freshwater, and that's changing. And so I'll just give you one quick example of changes over the past 25 years. Okay, so in 1997, that place that I mentioned during the talk, Mata Loco, it's sacred. It's an origin point, the origin of the river. It's an origin point for the people of the Karindi domain that own that resurgence of the river, that own the cave. It's the most sacred place in the Karindi community. In 1997, to go there required very weighty rituals just to go there. And you could only go with the owner of the place, the owner of the oral histories, the eldest ritual leader. Fast forward to 2022, the forest has been clear cut around Mataloko. The landscape around the cave has been surfaced with concrete, and giant holes have been dug, and pipes have been laid, and water's being siphoned out as part of the pro-Ayer development. There was an elaborate ritual when the pro-Ayer organization got the rights to construct that facility and the rights to water. When a foreigner, Warichoyo Dawa, that's also another Cody name I have, which means foreign woman. That's when I'm frequently called as well. When a foreign woman goes there nowadays, the only thing I was told when I went there in October was, as you're approaching, you might want to say a prayer. That's what I was told. Okay, so I did. And so did my companion, who is a 21-year-old woman, a Cody woman. And so no big deal, they said. It's no, what kind of prayer? I asked for more details. They're like, just say a prayer, you know. The spirits are still there. And that was it. And then, so we went, we did our thing, we left. As we left, my companion, the Cody woman, passed out and fell to the ground off of the moped. And that was explained by by her mother and grandmother as there being a lack of ritual protocol, that it's proof the ancestors still govern that place, but things have changed. So that I'll stop there, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff related to your question.
Charles.
Thank you. My name is Charles Ham. I'm a PhD student in urban and regional planning, and very interesting presentation today about Sumba. I'm actually interested in small islands development and equity issue in planning, especially. When I was in Sumba 2 or 3 years ago after the cyclone, because I work a lot in disaster response, I noticed as development expand to remote area and mountain and dry areas, I noticed there seems to be more and more settlements, houses on dry places where naturally, traditionally, people may not live on those places, but there's new roads, there's development. It looks to me, my naked eyes, that some people are taking the risk of living in some drier, risky places because they're near the road. Is that the case in Cody, that you notice that are there more, as development expand, more roads, are there more sprawls, settlements that increase the risk? I don't know about this village. How long have they been in the area? But I'd like to know more about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would say probably the villages that I mentioned are very long-standing ones. The population has increased, and more people are moving to roadsides, and yeah, there are more improved roads through more areas of Southwest Sumba, including the dry areas, and yeah, people are settling along those roads. So it's much more common for those houses to have concrete cisterns that they can get filled by tanker trucks or fill with rainwater. And so they tend to not, they tend to have alternative sources of water in addition to a spring or a river or creek or rainwater. But yeah, development is expanding out of Tambalaka, which is the government center of Southwest Sumba, and yeah, it's in Waitabula, which is the largest town in in the Regency. Yeah, I would say for sure, people, yeah, I don't know if it's so much riskier because the people that tend to move to these roadside homes or build roadside homes may have alternative sources or enough income to be able to purchase water. Thank you.
I have a question from online real quick. I just want to acknowledge Abdul Haq Chang has asked here a question about water policy debates in Indonesia. You opened up with, the SDGs, and you opened up with the water resources law, which has been so contentious in Indonesia, been shot down by the Constitutional Court several times now. What is your thoughts about what you saw from the household level contextualized within larger water policy debates in Indonesia?
Good question. So I didn't hear any conversations about national laws or rights to water or sustainable development goals in Cody. There are plenty of references to national level processes, but in terms of international and national rights to water, that's not sort of the rhetoric that I heard wrapped around the desire for access to fresh water in Cody. I feel like people are desperate to have access to improved sources of water, and they would like to have financial assistance for developing water facilities. They want a faucet in every home, for example, as one woman put it, and they want money to make that happen, or they want someone with money to come in and make that happen for them. I would say that that they would very much like for the state to step up and or some other entity that has money to come in and develop those things for them. I think they desperately want that to happen, and not putting my own judgment on that. I'm just sort of relaying what I hear Cody people saying, or my own evaluation or assessment on that. Yeah, they don't talk about it in terms of human rights, but for certain would like to have alternative sources because they see themselves as being marginalized because of water insecurity.
Great, thanks. Jeff, final question.
Actually, it kind of falls off Charles's question, and I may just be nitpicking here. I thought on your initial slides, you showed a village, that population decreased a little bit over that 25-year period, right?
Yes.
And, people are moving maybe to the new places along the road, but is there outmigration?
Yes.
There is.
Yes.
And I mean, while it didn't look much, or should have been an increase just due to population.
Yes.
So I would think it's a significant decrease in it.
Yes.
And that migration story's got to be part of this.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I was kind of surprised because at first I looked at population trends for the island and then for the Regency, they were going up. And then I looked at for Waiholo and it went down, not by much, like you said, but yeah, I mean, I don't claim to have the quantitative data to tell you why population decline happened, but what I think outmigration has something to do with it. So just, hearing people talk about other people, and asking questions about it. It's popular for people to travel to Kalimantan to work in the palm oil fields, and more and more children from Cody, from Waiholo, from Kori are going to school off island. So I could rattle off a handful of kids' names who are in Jogja or Bali at universities. And in 1997, I couldn't have told you one. I couldn't have told you one that was working on a palm oil field in Kalimantan. And there are other examples, but I have a feeling that that has something to do with it, the out-migration for labor and education.
All right, well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Fowler,
Okay,
for
thank
joining
you.
us today.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation, tough subject, really interesting insights from your recent field work. I'm going to shut off the Zoom now, but I think there are a couple additional hands going up in the room, so you might want to take a couple extra questions. Thanks a lot.